The Warsaw Uprising is among the most heroic events in World War II history in Poland. Sadly, as a result of the military action initiated by Home Army Command against Nazi German occupier, 200,000 Warsaw inhabitants perished, and up to 80% of the capital was ruthlessly destroyed. Regardless, the Uprising anniversary remains one of the most important events in the Polish calendar, and for generations of Poles, with many, myself included, honoring the memory of their ancestors who took part in the fighting. To talk about the Uprising and its place in modern European history, I'm joined by Justin Maciejewski, DSO MBE, Director of the National Army Museum in London, and a son of a Warsaw insurgent and a Home Army soldier himself. Thank you so much for joining me in the studio on this very important night.
It's a pleasure to be joining you here tonight and your viewers for this on the eve of this important anniversary.
So I wanted to start by having your side of the story. You live in London, you work in London, your family is located there, but you decided to join the 80th anniversary of the Warsaw Uprising. Why?
My father's buried here, and with his twin brother, who was identical twin brother, who was killed during the Warsaw Rising. So I think since his death, obviously coming here. Not every year, but regularly, just to honour his life and the life of his brother, my uncle, who I'm named after, Władysław, is an important part of our lives. And I brought my sons here. My wife is here with me for this anniversary. So honouring that service and that sacrifice in 1944 is an important thing to do for us as a family.
I can imagine that it must be quite a different experience for you, knowing that one part of your family comes from Warsaw and comes from Poland and has this sort of an experience, and the other part comes from Great Britain, two allies during World War II. How does it make you feel? How do you look at this whole event and the story of your family that's related to it?
Yes, that's a great question. I mean, this is a shared history in many respects. Obviously, what happened at Yalta and after the war was terrible for Poland. But of course, Britain and Churchill tried hard not to do what was decided at Yalta. Roosevelt and America was the dominant power at that point. I think there was a big sense of guilt in Britain about Yalta. And yet, Britain was the country in which my father found freedom. And my father found a home after the war. And we grew up in Britain. And of course, over 250,000 Poles fought with Britain, shoulder to shoulder, throughout the Second World War. So the Second World War is a shared history. Many British pilots died flying supplies to Warsaw during the Warsaw Rising, often forgotten. But it's this battle here in Warsaw, although obviously it's very much a Polish battle, is something where there is a shared history with Britain. And partly because so many of the Polish Home Army soldiers who couldn't come back to Poland after the Second World War found their homes in Britain and brought up families. So I regard this history, this story, and the aftermath and the legacy as very much a shared story between Britain and Poland.
You also mentioned that you come here to commemorate your father and his brother who died during the Warsaw Uprising, and you mentioned your family. I remember that we had a chance to speak in London about it at the National Army Museum, and you said it's incredibly important for you to share this history with your children. Why is that?
Well, I think that the Warsaw Rising was a terrible dilemma for those people of Warsaw and the commanders in the Home Army in 1944. What to do? Do we resist? Do we stay silent? Do we wait? Do we rise up now? This was an excruciating dilemma for everyone involved, and there were no easy answers. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, they made the decision to stand up and fight for freedom and fight for what was right. And of course, the consequences were tragic and horrific, because they were up against evil. And so I think why this is an important story, this is perhaps one of those chapters in history where it is simply good against evil. And there are moments in people's lives where people have to stand up. They have to fight. Even if the consequences might be terrible, the consequences of not doing something are even worse, potentially. And I think those lessons and those values that are tied up in those lessons are incredibly important lessons to hand on to the next generation.
I can tell that this is a very emotional subject, and obviously both of us having relatives who took part in the Warsaw Uprising, we are looking at a different side of history. I actually also brought the armband that belongs to our family, which is incredibly important, something that stayed as a memory for us, and it reminds us every day about the significance of actually taking up the arms when we're faced with evil, and this is something that I want to keep for my kids and hopefully for their kids in the future. However, we need to look at the difficult side of this conversation. Obviously, as I mentioned in the intro, 200,000 people from Warsaw died. There was also the Wola massacre happening on the 5th of August 1944. We are looking at the destruction of the capital. 80% of the capital, around 80%, was destroyed. And some people, some experts and historians claim that there was no chance of success for the Warsaw Uprising. With your particular vantage point, what is your opinion on this statement?
I mean, this is a great question, and there's no simple answer to this question. What happened in Warsaw was simply horrific. It's difficult to comprehend 80 years later. But 80 years later, Warsaw is a vibrant city. I've been walking around here today with my wife, having a fantastic morning in this wonderful city. And in many ways, given the evil that Warsaw was facing, Warsaw had to be destroyed in order to be saved. In other words, the soul of Warsaw, in many ways, was preserved by their willingness to fight for good against evil. And I think this is a very difficult thing to comprehend, but compromising with evil would have left somehow a stain on the soul of Warsaw in a way that the soul is somehow is not stained because of this tragic event. And my father was always hot and cold about the Warsaw Rising through his life. Sometimes he would say it was necessary, and other times he would say, why did we do it? So even my father, who fought in the Warsaw Rising, as a child growing up, he was always conflicted between, was it mad or was it right? And he never answered that question in his lifetime, I don't think. I think he was always carried this dilemma. Mm-hmm. But this is a dilemma that most of our generation haven't had to face in reality.
Indeed.
So it's very difficult to judge. But I think what we can say is that the 80 years following the Rising have seen Warsaw regrow through all the trials and the suffering of communism into this vibrant city that we have today. And the Warsaw Rising is such an important part of that unbroken story.
So you know the British military, you know the military, and whatever the decision-making process looks like yourself. There was definitely a discussion among the Home Army members, and this decision was made by the command. Do you think that the uprising would have taken place anyway if it would be just up to the civilians who had to undergo 6 years, by that point 5 years of occupation, of Nazi German occupation, or was this solely due to the decision made by the Home Army?
That's a good question. I think it's true to say, from the evidence we have, that when the Rising was launched, it was popular. There was a sense of optimism because, of course, they could see the Red Army approaching, and they realised they could hear the guns of the Red Army. So
it was a big hope.
It was a big hope.
That they will help.
It was a big hope. It was a big hope. But nevertheless, I think you can say from the evidence that at the beginning there was a sense of optimism in those first few days of the Rising, and therefore I think it would be wrong to say the decision was purely a military one. I think there was a groundswell. I think it's also worth reflecting on how much Warsaw had already suffered with the murdering of all the people in the ghetto and the destruction of the ghetto in the previous year, and of course the destruction in 1939. So the people of Warsaw by 1944 knew what the war was going to bring them, and so in many ways they had nothing to lose. So I think that this is incredibly complicated. I think the most important thing for us to do is not to judge either one way or the other, but merely to reflect on the values and the courage of those that took part in the Warsaw Rising, both civilians and the Home Army.
I would like to take a look at the Warsaw Uprising from a different perspective, from the British perspective. The generations of people living in Britain right now, including the young generations, is there any knowledge of the Warsaw Uprising in Great Britain, or is this a new chapter where the discussion is simply opening this very moment to reveal the history that might have been, out of sight for some Brits in the UK? Another great question. We mustn't forget that in August 1944, the British Army was fighting in Normandy, and they were suffering casualties that they had not suffered since the First World War. A big trauma.
A big trauma. So Britain's focus in August 1944 was the countryside beyond the beaches of Normandy. The liberation of Northwest Europe had commenced with D-Day, and of course the Polish were also involved in that campaign with General Maciejewski and his division. But the eyes of Britain were very firmly on Normandy. And of course the breakout from Normandy towards Belgium and Holland and towards Germany itself to destroy Nazi Germany. So Britain was playing its part in the West. So in 1944, Britain was aware of the Warsaw Rising. People were very much aware of it, but there was a sense of powerlessness as to what to do about the Warsaw Rising. And that's why the Royal Air Force flew planes from Italy all the way to Poland, the longest flight ever by the Royal Air Force, to drop supplies into Warsaw during September of 1944. Since the Second World War, the history of this rising has been not well known in Britain. When people in Britain think about Warsaw and risings, they think about the ghetto in 43 rather than the Warsaw Rising. That is changing now because we have nearly 1 million Polish people living in Britain who are British, Polish, and therefore this sense of shared history is much stronger now than it was when I was a child 40 years ago. So I think every year that passes, there's a greater awareness in Britain, through its connections with Poland, of this incredibly courageous but also tragic chapter in Poland's history.
It's definitely a tragic chapter, but definitely an event that we keep learning from. It's been 80 years since that very event. The anniversary is taking place tomorrow, and I know that you're here with the family to commemorate it as well, and we thank you for it. And I thank you for joining us here in the studio on the eve of this important anniversary. It's a pleasure, as always, to speak to you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure's all mine.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Justin Maciejewski, the director of the National Army Museum. And this would be all the latest news for now here on World News Tonight. Please stay tuned here on TVP World for more news and features.